The Apache woman stood at the edge of the river with the evening sun sinking low behind the red cliffs, its reflection turning the water into rippling gold. Her laughter carried easily on the breeze, light and teasing, the kind that hid deeper thoughts. She pushed her wet braids back over her shoulders and glanced at the cowboy who had stopped nearby with his horse, his boots dusty from the long trail. "You look like the kind of man who believes in luck," she said, her dark eyes glinting with mischief. "So I'll make you a deal." She lifted her empty hand. "I lost a ring in this river. Find it, and I'll be yours." It was meant as a joke, nothing more. The ring had slipped from her finger days ago during a sudden storm, swallowed by the fast, cold current. Even her people had told her to let it go. It was too small, too old, too far gone. She had learned to smile when she spoke of it, to pretend it no longer mattered. The cowboy didn't laugh. He studied her face instead, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. He noticed how her fingers curled unconsciously, as if the ring were still there. Slowly he dismounted, tied his horse to a nearby tree, and rolled up the sleeves of his worn shirt. "Where were you standing?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "I was joking," she said quickly, waving her hand as if to brush the moment away. "Men always take my words lightly. You should too." But he had already stepped closer to the river. The water moved fast, whispering over stones sharp enough to cut skin. He knelt, letting his fingers skim the surface, feeling the cold bite instantly. She watched him, her smile fading. That ring was not just metal. It had belonged to her mother, given to her the night before she died. It was a symbol of protection, of who she was, of where she came from. She had hidden that truth behind humor, because it hurt less that way. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice softer now. "It's gone." "I know it is." The cowboy stepped into the river anyway. The current pushed against his legs as the sky darkened, and the first stars appeared. He said nothing, only bent lower, searching the riverbed with steady hands. She wrapped her shawl tighter around herself, a strange unease settling in her chest. What had started as a careless joke now felt like something else entirely. As night fell and the river kept rushing on, she realized she was no longer laughing. Night settled fully over the river, the kind of deep, quiet darkness that made every sound feel louder. The water rushed past the cowboy's legs, cold and relentless, pressing against him as if testing his resolve. He moved slowly, carefully, feeling along the riverbed with numbed fingers, while the moon climbed higher above the canyon walls. The Apache woman stood on the bank, her earlier confidence fading with every passing moment. "You can stop now," she called out, trying to sound casual, though her voice trembled. It was never meant to go this far. He didn't answer. He only shifted his footing and bent lower, letting the water rise to his knees. Sharp stones scraped his palms, and once he sucked in a quiet breath as a jagged edge cut his skin. Blood disappeared instantly into the current, carried away as if it had never been there. Guilt crept into her chest. She had turned pain into humor because it was easier that way. The ring had been her last tie to her mother, worn smooth by generations before her. When it was lost, she had told herself it was just fate. Yet seeing this stranger search for it with such determination made the loss feel fresh again. "Please," she said more firmly now, "it's just a ring." The cowboy finally glanced back at her, his expression calm but unshaken. "Things that matter are never just anything," he replied, then turned back to the water. Time stretched. The moon reflected in broken pieces across the river's surface, and the night air grew colder. His hands were stiff, his movements slower now, but he did not stop. He felt every dip and curve of the stones beneath the current, committing each sensation to memory, as if patience alone might summon what was lost. She hugged herself, torn between hope and fear. Part of her wanted him to fail, so the joke could remain a joke. Another part, the one she kept buried, whispered that if he succeeded, nothing between them would ever be the same again. Just before dawn, when the sky began to pale and the darkness loosened its grip, his fingers brushed against something smooth. He froze, heart pounding, then closed his hand carefully, afraid the river might steal it back. Slowly he lifted his fist from the water. The Apache woman took a step forward. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and prayer. In his palm, faintly glowing in the newborn light, lay the ring, mud-streaked, scratched, but unmistakable. Her knees weakened. The world seemed to tilt as realization crashed over her. What she had thought impossible was now resting in his hand. He turned toward her, water dripping from his sleeves, exhaustion written into every line of his body. "I found it," he said quietly. The joke was gone, washed away by the river, leaving behind a truth she wasn't ready to face. She stared at the ring in his open palm, as if it might vanish if she blinked. The river's rush seemed distant now, muffled by the pounding of her heart. Slowly she stepped closer, the early morning air cool against her skin, her eyes never leaving that small circle of metal that had once felt lost forever. "That can't be real," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I searched for days. The river took it." He held it out to her without hesitation. "The river gives back sometimes," he said simply. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. When her skin brushed his, a quiet shock ran through her, sharp and unexpected. She closed her hand around the ring, feeling its familiar weight, and for a moment her chest tightened so much she could barely breathe. Memories rushed in, her mother's laughter, the warmth of her embrace, the night the ring had been pressed into her palm with a promise of protection. Tears blurred her vision. She had learned not to cry in front of strangers, not to show weakness, but they came anyway. She lowered her head, ashamed of the emotion she could no longer hold back. "I shouldn't have joked about it," she said softly. "It wasn't fair." The cowboy shook his head. "You didn't owe me the truth, and you don't owe me anything now." That was what unsettled her most. Any other man would have reminded her of her words, of the promise made in laughter. He did not. He stood there, soaked and bleeding, giving her space, as if her choice mattered more than his effort. She slipped the ring back onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had never been gone. When she looked up at him again, something in her gaze had changed. The teasing distance was gone, replaced by uncertainty and something warmer, more dangerous. "I said I'd be yours if you found it," she murmured. The words sounded heavier now, stripped of humor. "Do you know what that means to me?" He met her eyes, steady and respectful. "I know what it doesn't mean," he replied. "It doesn't mean I get to decide for you." Her breath caught. No man had ever spoken to her that way. She had been bartered, judged, laughed at, but never truly seen. The river had tested him, but his restraint tested her even more. She turned away briefly, watching the water glide past as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything had. When she faced him again, her voice was quieter, steadier. "What if I meant it more than I knew at the time?" she asked. He didn't reach for her. He didn't answer quickly. He simply waited, allowing the moment to belong to her alone. And in that silence she felt the weight of a choice she had never been given before. The first light of full morning spread across the valley, soft and pale, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The Apache woman stood with the river behind her, the ring resting once again on her finger, cool against her skin. She studied it for a long moment, then lifted her gaze to the cowboy, who waited a few steps away, his hat held loosely in his hands. "In my world," she said at last, her voice calm but firm, "no one is owned. We are not prizes won by effort or promises spoken in jest." She paused, making sure he understood every word. "Belonging is something a woman chooses." He nodded slowly, not interrupting, not trying to sway her. The silence between them felt respectful, unpressured, and that alone told her more about his character than any grand speech could have. She stepped closer, the morning breeze tugging gently at her dress. "You crossed cold water, cut your hands, and never once reminded me of what I said. You could have claimed something from me." Her eyes softened. "You didn't?" He lowered his head slightly. "I wasn't looking to claim anything," he said. "I just wanted to return what mattered to you." Her chest tightened. All her life, men had taken land, choices, dignity, always telling her it was the way of the world. Yet here stood a man who had given everything of himself and asked for nothing. "That is why," she said quietly, "this is my decision." She reached out, not to touch him, but to close the distance, so they stood side by side, facing the river together. "If I walk with you," she continued, "it won't be because of a joke or a debt or a bargain. It will be because I choose to. The cowboy turned toward her then, emotion finally breaking through his calm. He placed his hat over his heart, a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. "That's the only way I'd accept it," he replied. They stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming the earth and lighting the water in bright, living color. There was no dramatic embrace, no hurried promise of forever, just two people sharing a quiet understanding. Aware that what they had found was rare and fragile, the Apache woman smiled, a real smile this time, free of armor or mischief. The river flowed on behind them, carrying away the night, the pain, and the careless joke that had started it all. Some promises are spoken in laughter, she thought. The ones that matter most are chosen in silence.